first of all, then we'll talk, Mr. Ryan, questions, and then bit by bit, when this process comes to any kind of natural conclusion, then we'll call on the next speaker to come and talk to us about this. Mr. Harrison, who, and I mean not just distribution necessarily in general, but in particular to begin with, I understand the history of this and then foreign films, the problems there are trying to bring this kind of film to the general public. So feel free to
Mr. Ryan, I wonder if you wouldn't comment on a statement you made in your article on page 3, where you say cost was a dominant determining factor at all times influencing the very style of the film.
Yes. Well, you see, we have Bengali films with a very small market in India. It's one of the 14 languages spoken, and Bengali films play only in Bengal, which is about 1/20 of the total population of India, and we can afford to spend, if we have to get back our cost, not more than, in terms of dollars, it would be 20,000. And we try to keep our cost below $25,000 at the most, which means that raw stock being expensive, we have to use very little film, as little as possible, which means fewer takes and sometimes long continuous takes, because time is money, you know, instead of scenes broken up into many shots from many angles. That certainly determines the rhythm of the film, the look of it. And we couldn't afford to take sound equipment with us, so much of it was sort of synchronized. And well, that is how we have to keep our costs low, you see, and rehearsal time has to get to a minimum. We generally, if we are shooting outdoors, we arrive on the location about 7 in the morning, and we start shooting around 9 o'clock. If it's summer, then the sun lasts longer, you see, days are longer, and we have to be quick about it. I mean, 1 rehearsal, 2 rehearsals at the most. But I like to give time to, I mean, I spend a lot of time explaining to the actors what sort of actions I want and what is the psychology behind their speech, their dialogue, their movements, so that they can get a feel of the scene they're playing. But rehearsals, I don't rehearse very much because I feel sometimes I find that the first spontaneous interpretation by the actors concerned is good enough for me. I found that very often the first take is the best. I've learned that. I don't think there's a single take, single shot for which more than 3 takes are necessary in this film. Except for one which you saw, which involved synchronization of, you know, that you remember the scene with the Candyman where the sort of children run after him and that the dog follows them. And it was not a trained dog, it was just an ordinary village dog. And the dog wouldn't get up at the right moment, you know, and we had 11 takes for that. And actually, there are 3 dogs in this film. It's not the same dog, it's supposed to be the same, but there are 3 dogs. One of them died, the other grew so thin and bony that the continuity was all ruined. In fact, there's one shot where from a particular angle you see one dog, and from the reverse angle, the very next shot, it's a different dog. The shot taken a year later. There was a gap of 1 year. We couldn't finish the scene, didn't have any money, and 1953, part of the scene, 54, the rest of it.
Which were the professional actors?
The father And the schoolmaster with the cane, you know, the grosser come schoolmaster.
The others were people you found in that locale?
Not all of them, the big players, the village elders are all village people, and the girls and boys, excepting the two children, my brother and sister, they come from the city, they were school children. The boy lived just next door, and the girl we found from school.
Did they have any acting experience? Or?
No, none at all. The mother had appeared on the stage. She was not as an amateur stage, you know.
How many times did you take that traveling shot where you reveal finally that the animal was dead?
Oh, 2 takes, I remember.
Oh, very
Yes.
good.
We had 3 sort of tracks for that, wooden tracks. That's the longest trolley shot in the film. In the beginning, I was not using any trolley. I was wondering if I could do without them, because if they're troublesome, you know, the ground is uneven. It takes a lot of time getting a proper level trolley. But later on, I found that some scenes just didn't come off without some trolley, some tracking somewhere in the scene. You know. Actually, in the beginning, the first day's shooting was all completely ruined. I mean, it looked terrible in the rushes, and I had to scrap everything and stuff. But later on, we were all learning as we were going on, you know, and made fewer and fewer mistakes towards the end. And actually, the film was, as far as possible, shot in sequence. That is, as the story goes on, you know, as much as possible, because towards the end you have all the difficult scenes with the climaxes and this and that, and we all needed experience, and we felt that better to.
Was it a carefully worked out shooting script from the point of view of the camera, or was that more or less improvised?
Well, we had to do a lot of improvising, but I had the script in my head, and I would make little sketches one day before shooting and discuss the setups with my cameraman, you see. So it's gradually developed. I had something written down, but not a proper typewritten script as you probably have in Hollywood. I was probably too lazy to do it. But I had the whole thing in my head. I knew everything. I knew the dialogue. There's very little dialogue in any case. And I had the shape of the film in my head. Of course, we couldn't do everything that we wanted. There was one scene in the scenario which could never be taken because we didn't have money at the right moment. Actually, before the first rains, generally there's a great thunderstorm, a lot of dust storm, you know, and then the rain comes, you see. That entire scene where the sort of mangoes and guavas fall from the trees and the children go run and gather all they can. And then the rain comes, you see, but that scene is not in the film, it was in the script.
Just one, the mother picked up one, didn't she?
Yes.
She went into the house.
Yes. Actually, the 2 children were supposed to pick up all the guavas and mangoes from the orchard which originally belonged to them, you see.
Were you, you mentioned that you were working with an advertising agency, was that?
Yes, because I was working, actually, about, say, nearly all the film was shot in the beginning on Sundays and holidays. I was a sort of Sunday filmmaker. I was shooting on Sundays and holidays because I was working in this advertising agency at the same time, you know. I had to have this job, otherwise I couldn't get going. And so in the beginning, we were working on Sundays and holidays, and we have long leaves during the festive season, which is October, November, month or so. 3 weeks leave we get in the office. And towards the end, I had to take some more leave from the office. But I was with the agency all the time during the making of the film.
Are those months the rainy season, as you expected?
No, the rainy season, actually the monsoon starts around July, August, September. That's the rainy season in Bengal. We had, the rain shots were taken in October, and normally there is no rain, you see. We had no money in the rainy season.
Did you grow up in this area?
With Bengal?
Did you grow up in this area?
Oh, no, no, I was born in the city and absolutely Calcutta, my place. But the villages are not very far from the city. One can go and stay there if one likes.
In that train sequence there with the
Yes.
green, how did you get that effect? Was it a red filter or something?
We had only one filter for the entire film. It was a medium yellow, I think. I don't normally like deep filters very much. I don't let my in fact my cameraman himself doesn't like unless it's a special effect you want to have a night scene, moonlit night or something. Because it does something to the light. I mean, you get a sort of artificial kind of effect. The sky becomes too dark, the clouds become too sort of white, and it does something to the Indian skin too, which I don't like very much. The complexion is...
What kind of film did you use on this?
Oh yes,
Stock?
Plus X, Kodak, English.
And what about
Same, yes. Actually, Tri-X hadn't come to India yet. We used Tri-X for the second film. Very much. A lot of it. I think we could have done better with Tri-X because you can shoot for a longer time, you know, even in falling light with a faster film.
But, was there much attention, well, same
Yes.
question, but how much attention, I should say, was paid to the advancing light and retreating light?
Oh, actually, the
because of
scenario was conceived in terms of light, you know, in terms of seasons and in terms of light. Most of the morning shots were taken in the morning and evening shots in the evening and that kind of thing. And autumn shots in the autumn season because the vegetation is all very distinctive. You know, the look of the countryside changes with the seasons, and I was trying to stick to the seasons as much as possible.
How about the question of putting foreign language subtitles on? How do you decide when and where to put them and how many to put, so on, spacing?
I had nothing to do with the subtitling of this film, so I've never given the matter any thought at all.
Oh.
The version here, though, is not a cut one.
I noticed 2 small cuts, that's all.
In working with children, do you describe to them what is actually happening in the film, or
No.
do you...
Not with the little boy.
Yes.
With the girl, of course, I told her everything. She was grown up enough to understand. But with the little boy, I used a sort of slightly mechanical, artificial method of getting what I wanted, you know. And I felt that it would join up properly. And I would get it. The boy was really far too young. He was only 6, I think, 5 or 6.
I see this one.
Is there any language that you could have made it in that would have captured a larger share of the market in India?
Hindi is spoken everywhere, but it's essentially a story of Bengal, and I didn't think it would look right and sound right.
Would a French subtitle in the other language do well?
Hindi subtitles.
In Hindu?
Well, you see, the people in India are not using subtitles, and I don't know, because the percentage of literacy is pretty low, and there wouldn't be many people who would be able to follow it. I think it would be better without, because they would follow the story. I think it's quite a familiar situation, and more or less the main emotional problem, the main psychological relationships are all will hold good for any village in India, I think.
Did you have any hopes for foreign market when you produced it?
I had the foreign market in mind because I was not sure of the local market, this being a very different kind of film that's generally produced. I was hoping that people abroad would like it.
How would you receive?
I didn't modify my style with that in mind, you know. I sort of developed naturally, but I had a hope that people abroad would like it.
How was it received locally?
Very well. better than I expected, much better.
In the very crucial climax of when the mother, completely breaks up, her husband's return about the death of the daughter, I was very struck with the fact that you removed all human sound and used only music. And I was wondering whether this was just a thing that you felt was right for this specific situation, or if you have sort of a feeling generally about sound and the image.
Well, actually, that scene was, we had sound for that scene, you know, the sound of weeping, but I didn't like the sound of it, you know. I felt it would be too harrowing. I wanted to sort of transform it in some way or other, so I felt that music would do it better. I mean, it was more moving. Right? There are certain things that you don't want to see in close-up or hear in close-up, you know. It was a feeling.
Made it more universal, didn't it?
I don't know.
Yes.
What was that instrument that created you?
It's a string instrument, it's bowed, it's called a sarangi, and it was muted, you know. It can be muted in the manner of the way the violin is muted.
It's interesting to compare that scene with the scene in Waterfront, where sound effects and music take over so that we don't hear something that's being said.
Yes.
Waterfront being
I
made a
remember
little bit
that.
after this, your own scene.
Oh, yes.
And somehow the scene was much less effective in retrospect, because you felt the engineering. You felt that
But
this
there,
was tried.
there was some dialogue.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
And then remember the whistles and the pile driver sounds drowned.
I had a feeling of a slight evasion on the part of the
Yes.
director there, because the dialogue should have been very important and significant there. There was a critical, crucial moment, I think. It was a kind of shortcut method, I felt.
Did you make any major change on the original story? You just faithfully follow the original story?
I made a lot of changes. The original had something like 300 characters. Well, hundreds of incidents. I chose the most effective incidents, and they do not appear in the book in the order in which you see in the film. You see, I sort of did some shuffling. And it's actually, I've taken only the first half of the book. The second half of the book and a little bit of the second volume goes into the second film.
Making of this film, was there any, did you have any intent beside the content? Did you put a certain meaning making by this film? Besides from
Whether it has a moral or
yes,
message or...
Yeah.
I don't think so, really. I don't like morals or messages. It says certain things which I believe are true of India, certain parts of India, certain conditions of life in India. And I think that is enough.
How did you think about this last sequence, this hero? Finally he decided to go out, abandoning his three generations village.
Yes.
How did you think about that? Yes.
How did I think about that?
Yeah.
Well, it was in the book, you see, and I felt that, well, you might as well start afresh in a new place.
You spoke of having had contact with the film fairs. I was wondering if there were any particular aspects of this film which you feel were influenced by Godolphin and Eisenstein.
For Godolphin and Eisenstein, I don't think you will find this film at all, but there are certain films that left a deep impression in me. Films like, for instance, Nanook and Louisiana Story, and Dovzhenko's Earth, and a film by Jean Renoir called The Southerner, which he made in America, and ultimately Rascal Thieves, which I felt that they were worthwhile films, and I admired this style, the form, the content, everything. But when one makes a film, one is not necessarily influenced by films alone. There are other things, literature, music, all kinds of things can influence you. After all, it's a composite kind of art which absorbs influences, various diverse influences.
Imagine that those who would look for an influence might say, ah yes, Doshenko, the little girl dancing through the village. As the, they can always find them if they want to.
Did you see A Place in the Sun?
Place in the Sun or Walk in the Sun? Places, yes, yes, I've seen. American Tragedy?
Yes,
yes.
They're your sound anticipating the scene or following after the scene. I mean, your transitions.
Oh yes.
To, which I thought was very good.
Well, we had, the re-recording was in a very primitive state at that time, and we had a machine which had only three synchronous channels, one for dialogue, one for music, and one for effects, and the other was good for loops only. And we had some difficulty with the knobs and the fade-outs. Not fade-outs, you know, and the fade-ins were sudden, and but there was nothing that we could do about it. Nothing at all.
Could I ask you about your the problems you have with non-professional actors and your post-recording? Did they seem to respond rather well to the original feelings and emotions?
I don't like post synchronization very much, but there was no other way. And I tried the best I could, and they cooperated.
Not being in a different language, I couldn't, of course, see how synchronous they were and so on, but they seemed to be quite
yes, they looked all right today.
Did you post-synchronize soon after the shooting or after long delays?
Well, it depended. You see, sometimes we posted out on the same day in the evening after the shooting was over. And sometimes we waited until we got studio floor space, because outdoors you can't post-synchronize very well with all the bird noises and all that.
Did the old lady live in this village?
No. She had spent her early days in the village, but she was living in Calcutta when we found her.
Who were the professional actors, and what differences did you find in performance?
I found it easier to direct non-professionals, because they're not sort of
self-conscious.
Yes, they had no preconceived notions about acting, you see, and I could exactly tell them what I wanted, and they more or less were able to cooperate better. But I must say, the father, in the beginning, he was a little too, you know, wide gestures and all that, but later on he adapted himself very well.
He was non-professional.
He was a professional. His father was a film actor. He's been a film actor for a very long time.
Did he follow the rushes?
No. Who?
Did the father? I mean,
No.
did he study his own style from the rushes? Or?
I don't generally encourage
yes.
actors seeing rushes.
How much motion picture education or conditioning had these non-professionals had up to this point, you know?
I don't follow the question.
Well, I mean, how much exposure to
well, they
motion
see
picture
movies.
screen? Yeah, they.
Oh yes, but they're not familiar with the way a film is made. You know, they're not familiar with studio conditions or a scene being broken up into shots. But it doesn't take them very long to learn. In the beginning, they're a little confused by those, you know, sudden abrupt cuts and.
You mentioned that you had done quite a bit of still photography. I was wondering,
only as an amateur.
Yes. Between the time that you began to shoot, the period of waiting, you know, after you finish your scenario on the ship, so on, Did you do any experimenting at all with the...
No, I was too depressed to think of filmmaking. I concentrated on advertising design.
You don't happen to have
It's
any-
most depressing to come up against hatred.
You spoke of your cameraman, who was completely unexperienced, having a certain amount of taste, which you had complete trust in. Do you feel this is an essential thing? I mean, how do you tell whether the person has taste, I mean, before they've done anything?
Well, we used to discuss the films that we
Yes.
would see, and I had my own ideas. If his tallied with mine, I mean, that's the only way I can put it.
But Mr. Roy, didn't you discuss it with drawings, the drawings that you showed me in that big book?
Oh, yes.
You haven't spoken of those yet, and I think those are...
Yes, I think I've said that I did make little small sketches of frames, you know, and I discussed with my cameraman. In fact, it helps me too, because I get a visual idea of what I'm going to shoot, and I know what shots have been taken and what remain. And there are certain fundamental things that I do believe. I respect natural light as much as possible. I don't like sort of boosting shadows with artificial light too much. And when shooting indoors, I don't like, for instance, multiple shadows unless the picture establishes more than one source of light. You see, I try to avoid it. For instance, in the indoor shooting, which you will find in the second film, I have day scenes in that, shot indoors in the studio, and we use reflected light as much as possible. We don't have direct light unless there's a source established. I have a horror of multiple shadows, you know. I don't know whether you see what I mean.
You didn't have to worry about microphone placement, and you didn't shoot it all silent.
No, the studio work we had microphones, of course. That is always a problem. I mean, it's a constant tussle between the cameraman and the sound recorders.
But all of the village material was shot?
No, some we had sound. Towards the end, when we could afford it, sound, you see, when the government had taken over. We had magnetic tape, Stansel, Hoffman, or something to make. Synchronous tape.
How well in advance did you have scenes like the two sequences of a pond, and the pond leaves before the storm and after the storm? Did that evolve during the course of shooting or not?
That did. And the entire sequence of those little insects in the water, that was not in the script. Those shots were taken on days when the weather would be bad and we had the proper shots, the shots that we needed for scenes where the actors couldn't be taken and we were sitting idle. And those were taken, and I had a vague idea that I could probably use them in the film somewhere at some point. But that materialized in the editing room at the end, right at the end.
Except for the train and the telegraph wires, there seemed to have been almost no impingement of the 20th century on the village life.
Yes.
Did you have to carefully exclude a telephone pole here and a TV aerial there to make this?
And all bicycles and motor cars and things and everything.
The thing that amazed me was that you could have these long panning shots, these through shots, these wide shots, and still do this.
We had to be very careful. 20th century comes sort of gradually into the picture of the second film and more in the third, which is mostly a city story.
Is that what you're working on now, the third one?
Yes.
And I understand, this is right, this is a trilogy?
Yes.
Is the third part also from the original book, or is this an extension?
It is from the original book.
This is all.
Any more questions?
Actually, the telegraph sound was created in the editing room. It's just we recorded the resonance of the piano keys. We struck a discord and recorded the resonance and made a loop.
You cut off the...
Yes.
Is there anything more at the moment? We shall tomorrow, of course, have another opportunity.
Is this book in English?
No translations exist.
What does it mean?
Well, it means the ballad. A ballad would be a close translation of Panchali. Pather is of the road, Song of the Road. Song of the Road would look better.
Oh, the same way in French for balader, to go along, ballad.
Yes.
What changes would you make, if any, if you could go back and do it?
Oh, well, the first half I'm not so happy about. There's too many rough edges in that. I feel that some of the shots are held for too long, and it needs a little more music here and there. But I'm happy with the second half, right from the death of the old woman, I should say, right up to the end. It's all right. But little sort of finishing touches of action.
Did you have any, did the old woman, was her health or her energy any problems in shooting? Or did you have to respect that pretty carefully?
Yes, particularly in summer and the hot season.
As far as her temperament though, was there any?
Oh, she was extremely enthusiastic and uncomplaining.
We've had very few Indian films in America. We've had very few Indian feature films. Do you think that in the future we'll be getting more? Will there be some kind of rise in the Indian film industry, or at any rate production?
I'm afraid it's unpredictable. It remains to be seen. The right people get the right opportunity. It all depends on that. But I do believe that there are people who could make good films suitable for the Western market.
Generally speaking, Indian films longer than the average American feature film, or what was once the average American feature film?
What was once the... yes. Not necessarily the Bengali ones, but the ones that are produced in Bombay and Madras in South India. They're pretty long. They have enormous appetite for films. 16,000, 17,000 is the normal length, I think. It's the songs and the dances which take up a lot of footage.
What was the device for seeing the wonders of the cities? The man was the kind of peep show.
Yes.
I'm fascinated by
just a glass, magnifying glass, with little sort of slides inside, which it keeps on changing.
It's not like another version of our old Nickelodeon, is it?
I think it's very much like that.
The pictures actually move?
Well, he keeps on revolving when you see it.
Along the same line, what was that wonderful black substance that the children were eating there? Was that molasses?
That was tamarind, pickled, something like that.
It didn't make any difference, but I thought how good it must taste.
On something like that thing that was being mentioned about the peep show box there, was that something that you had in mind, or was it something that happened along?
No, it was in the book itself.
Well, it was.
And it's very common in the villages, you see.
Well, any more questions?
I just have a small one. We were mentioning this at lunch. Somebody said something about sort of a seemingly unconcern on the part of the children or the father's departure, and the father for as he left the children. I mean, he left the children, and the remark was made, the children just asked for a few cents to look in this. Is this
Well, he was supposed to be returning in a fortnight's time.